When a wave of savage killings sweeps through Colorado Springs, a local officer and a mysterious woman uncover a blood feud between two monstrous legends. I'm Mr. Midnight Horror, your terrifying host. If you're already part of our pack, your support means everything to us. Each like, comment, and share helps uncover more stories like this. Or subscribe to see what rises from the depths of darkness and unfolds before you. Now, let's begin. It started with a radio call at 2:13 a.m. Officer Greg Rawlins had just finished his shift near Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs when the dispatcher came through with static-filled urgency. Unit 7, report of a vehicle collision on Cheyenne Mountain Road. No other vehicles involved. Witness reported hearing something scream. Greg adjusted in his seat, tired but alert. That stretch of road twisted through thick pine forest, barely lit even in daylight. At night, it swallowed light whole. He drove toward the scene with headlights cutting into the darkness like a blade. When he arrived, he immediately noticed something was off. The car was torn open, not smashed from a crash, but ripped. The driver's side door was 20 feet away, shredded. The hood was crumpled, as if something had landed on it. Greg approached with his flashlight, hand resting on his holster. Inside, the driver, a man in his 30s, was dead. But it wasn't the impact that killed him. His throat was torn out. Deep lacerations covered his chest and arms. The blood had already soaked through the floorboards. No skid marks, no animal hair, just carnage. Greg stepped back, scanning the tree line. Pine needles crunched underfoot. He heard something move, too heavy for a deer. He raised his light. Eyes. They blinked, reflecting amber for a fraction of a second. Then they were gone. By the time backup arrived, Greg had already called it in as an animal attack. That was the only explanation anyone would accept. Mountain lions, maybe. Even though every instinct in him screamed otherwise. The next morning, Greg reviewed the dashcam footage from his cruiser. Something tall, at least 8 feet, appeared at the edge of the tree line for a split second. Bipedal, covered in dark fur. It watched the scene before turning away. He didn't show the footage to anyone. 3 days later, another body turned up, a hiker this time. Found half a mile up the mountain, dangling from a pine by his ankles. His chest was torn open, ribs exposed. No heart. The medical examiner had no explanation for the way the skin had been peeled so cleanly. "I've seen bear attacks," he muttered to Greg. "This ain't one." Greg returned to the mountain that night. Alone. He stood by the site where the hiker was found, flashlight scanning the dark forest. His breath fogged in the cold air. The forest was silent. Not even the wind moved the branches. As he turned to leave, he felt it. Eyes on him. Cold. Calculating. Then came the growl. Deep, measured. Not from a dog. Not from a bear. Greg turned, flashlight shaking slightly, but there was nothing. Yet. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the footage. The ripped car. The mangled body. The blinking amber eyes. Something was hunting out there. And it wasn't done yet. Greg went to Sheriff Madeline O'Connor the next morning. She was ex-military, stoic, with a scar running across her chin from a knife fight back in '98. "I want you to take a look at something," Greg said, sliding the footage across her desk. She watched, rewound, watched again, her jaw clenched. "I've seen something like this before," she muttered. "But it was a long time ago. Before you joined the force." "What do you mean?" "There were killings like this back in '84, out near Teller County. They said it was a bear. But no bear hangs a man upside down from a tree and strips the skin like leather. Back then, I was told to keep quiet." She paused, leaning back in her chair. "Something's back, Greg, and I think it remembers this place." Before he could speak, her radio crackled. "Sheriff, Just got a call from a ranch off Highway 115. Livestock torn to pieces. Said there's remains. Madeline grabbed her hat. Let's go. The ranch belonged to an old man named Henry Caswell. Greg had met him once before. He raised goats and kept to himself. They found Henry kneeling in the pasture. His goats were gone, not eaten, just destroyed. Limbs flung across the field, blood soaked into the soil like spilled oil. And in the middle of it all was Henry's nephew, a farmhand named Jesse. His body had been folded in half, spine snapped, the back of his head missing. Greg turned to the sheriff. This is getting worse. She looked at the trees, expression unreadable. It's hunting in a pattern. First a loner on the road, then a hiker, now a farm. It's moving closer to town. Greg stepped away from the carnage and looked toward Cheyenne Mountain. The trees stood still, but he knew whatever it was watching. Waiting. The ranch stayed sealed for 2 days. State wildlife officers came and went, taking pictures, collecting samples, pretending they understood what they were seeing. Greg watched them work with forced patience. None of them said it out loud, but every face told the same story. They were scared. The official report blamed a rogue bear. Greg knew better. That night, he drove alone toward the western edge of Colorado Springs, past the neighborhoods and strip malls, past the last streetlight that still pretended civilization mattered. Beyond that point, the road narrowed and climbed. Forest pressed in on both sides, heavy and dark. He parked near a trailhead and shut off the engine. The silence hit immediately. No insects, no birds. Just the faint sound of wind brushing the treetops far above. Greg stepped out with his flashlight and sidearm. He followed the trail for nearly half a mile, boots sinking into damp soil. He kept replaying what Sheriff O'Connor had said. Something's back. The beam of his flashlight caught something in the dirt. Tracks. They were not bear prints. 5 toes. Long. The heel pressed deep, as if the thing carried immense weight. The stride was long, deliberate, bipedal. Greg swallowed and followed them. The tracks led off the trail, down a slope, toward a dry creek bed. The smell hit him before he saw anything. Copper, rot, wet fur. He covered his nose with his sleeve and pushed forward. That's when he saw the body. It was a man, or what had once been one. Naked. Torn open from throat to groin. His arms were bent at wrong angles, snapped and twisted. The face was frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouth open as if trying to scream long after the lungs were gone. Greg checked the wallet with shaking hands. Name, Lucas Varon. Missing hiker. Reported 2 days ago. The chest cavity was empty. No heart, no lungs. Greg backed away, pulse hammering. His flashlight beam shook as it swept the surrounding trees. That was when he noticed the marks on the bark. Long vertical grooves, deep enough to split wood fibers. Claw marks. High up. At least 8 feet from the ground. You didn't even bother hiding this one, Greg muttered. A sound came from deeper in the woods. Not a howl, not a growl. Footsteps, slow, heavy, purposeful. Greg raised his weapon and turned in a full circle. The forest swallowed the light. Then, from behind him, a voice spoke. You shouldn't be here. Greg spun, gun raised. A woman stood 10 feet away, half hidden by the trees. Late 20s, dark hair braided down her back. Her clothes were layered and worn, built for cold and long nights outdoors. She wasn't afraid of the gun. Identify yourself, Greg said. My name is Ashka Redfeather, she replied. And if you stay here much longer, you'll die. Greg kept the gun up. You found this body? I smelled it, she said. Same way it smells you. She glanced past him, eyes narrowing toward the darkness. It's still close. Greg hesitated. Every instinct told him to arrest her, question her, bring backup. But another part of him, the part that had seen the dashcam footage, knew she was telling the truth. You know what did this? He said. Ashka nodded once. Yes. What is it? She took a step closer. Greg didn't lower the gun. There are 2 hunters in these mountains now, she said. One was always here. The other came back because blood called it. Greg's grip tightened. You're saying this thing is intelligent. I'm saying it remembers, she replied. And it hates. Before Greg could respond, something crashed through the brush uphill. Branches snapped. The ground vibrated faintly. Ashka's posture changed instantly. She crouched, eyes fixed forward. It followed you, she said. That's bad. Greg turned, heart pounding. We need to get out of here. No, Ashka said. If we run, it chases. That's what it wants. Another step. Closer now. Greg saw movement between the trees. A tall silhouette, too thin, too upright. Then, from the opposite direction, something else emerged. It stepped into the faint light like it owned the forest. Massive, broad shoulders, dark fur matted with old scars. Its head was canine but wrong. The snout was shorter, the eyes forward-facing and amber. Intelligent, cold. It stood on 2 legs. Greg's knees almost gave out. The creature didn't look at him. It stared straight at the trees where the other presence hid. Ashka exhaled slowly. Good, she whispered. He's awake. The second presence shifted, retreating slightly. The tension in the air was suffocating, like the moment before a gunshot. Then the forest erupted. The tall, thin creature lunged first, moving with terrifying speed. Greg barely tracked it before it collided with the larger one. Claws tore through fur, flesh ripped, blood sprayed across leaves and soil. The sound was not animal. It was violent, deliberate. Greg stumbled backward, nearly dropping his gun. The larger creature fought differently. Controlled, efficient. It absorbed blows and countered with brutal precision, sinking its jaws into the other's shoulder and tearing free chunks of muscle. The thinner one shrieked in rage and pain, slashing wildly. One strike opened the larger creature's chest, blood pouring freely. Ashka grabbed Greg's arm. If they notice us, we're dead. The thinner creature broke away, retreating into the darkness, wounded but alive. The larger one did not pursue. It stood there, chest heaving, eyes burning as it watched its enemy flee. Then it turned its gaze to Greg. Greg froze. The creature studied him, head tilting slightly, as if weighing something. Then it looked at Ashka. A long moment passed. Finally it stepped back into the trees and vanished. The forest fell silent again. Greg collapsed to one knee, gasping. What the hell was that? He said. Ashka didn't answer right away. She stared at the darkness where the fight had been. That, she said finally, was the beginning of a war. And the other one? Greg asked. Her jaw tightened. That was the reason you're already dead, she said, if we don't stop it. In the distance far beyond the ridge, a long, deliberate howl rolled through the mountains. Not in pain, in promise. Greg didn't sleep that night. He tried. He lay in bed with the curtains drawn and his service weapon on the nightstand. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the fight again. The ripping flesh, the unnatural movements, the quiet intelligence in those glowing eyes. There was no rationalizing it, no bear, no mountain lion. This was something else. By morning, his mind was made up. He didn't go to the station. Instead, he drove west toward Ute Pass, following winding roads into the heart of the mountains. There was someone there he needed to find. Ashka had mentioned a name during their walk back through the forest. Someone old, someone who remembered the stories. She hadn't given directions, just a name. Tahwari Blackridge. Locals in Woodland Park knew the name. An old Ute man who lived in near isolation deeper into the forest, far from paved roads and cell phone signals. Greg parked near a ranger station and began the hike alone, the air thinning with every step. He carried water, a flashlight, and his sidearm, and a growing sense that he was being watched. It took 2 hours to find the cabin. It was small, set into the hillside, with smoke trailing from the chimney and a dozen strange symbols carved into the beams above the door. Animal skulls hung from the trees nearby. It looked less like a home and more like a warning. He knocked. Nothing. Then the door opened slightly. A single eye stared at him. Bloodshot, amber, calculating. "I'm Greg Rawlins," he said, suddenly unsure why he'd come. "I need to talk to you. It's about something in the forest." The door creaked wider. Tahwari was old. His skin looked like dry leather, his long gray hair tied in a braid that reached his back. He said nothing, just turned and walked back inside. Greg followed. The cabin was filled with old paper, strange trinkets, and the sharp smell of smoke and herbs. Tahwari sat across from him without speaking. He just waited. So Greg told him everything. The bodies, the fight, the tracks, Ashka, all of it. Tahwari didn't interrupt once. When Greg finished, the old man finally spoke. "It is happening again," he said. "Just like before." "You've seen them," Greg said. Tahwari nodded. "My father told me stories. His father told him. Our people lived here before the towns, before the roads. We shared these mountains with other beings. Some were spirits, others were worse." Greg leaned forward. "What are they?" Tahwari pointed to a carved totem on the wall, a twisted shape, part canine, part man, standing over another creature, its jaws clamped around its throat. "There are 2 kinds," he said. "One born of bloodlust, the Kotsa, the beast that devours. It walks on 2 legs but lives for chaos. That's what you saw killing the hiker. That is the hunter." "And the other?" Greg asked. "The Shagowa," Tahwari said, "the balance keeper. It does not serve man, but it opposes the Kotsa. They are bound by hatred. Where one appears, the other eventually follows." Greg's throat went dry. "So the one that saved us?" "Not your savior," Tahwari interrupted. "A rival. Their war is older than any map you've ever seen. But you," he added, "are now in the middle of it." Greg stood. "How do I stop it?" "You don't," Tahwari said. "You survive. That's all any of us ever do." The door burst open. Ashka stood there soaked with sweat and breathing hard. "He's moving," she said. 2 more people are dead in Manitou Springs. He left one hanging from a power line." Tahwari closed his eyes and muttered something in Ute. "I thought he would wait longer," he whispered, "but the presence of Shagoa has angered him." Greg looked between them. "Where does this end?" Ashka turned to him, her eyes hard. "You don't get it yet," she said. "This isn't just about killing. This is a territorial war, and now you're part of the territory." They left the cabin in silence. Ashka led Greg to a clearing where she kept an old truck half covered in tarp. As she pulled it free, Greg noticed the symbol painted on the hood. A circle of fangs, a tribal ward. They drove toward Manitou Springs. Police had already cordoned off the scene, but Ashka knew a back way. She guided Greg into an alley behind the gas station where the first body had been found. The body was gone, but the blood hadn't been cleaned. It was everywhere. Across the alley wall, dripping from a fire escape. Greg climbed up the side ladder. At the top, the second body was still there. A woman, middle-aged. She'd been strung upside down by her ankles, her torso opened from navel to collarbone. Her heart was missing. Greg stepped back. "This isn't random," Ashka said. "It's a message. It's always a message." They didn't stay long. The sun was already fading, and Ashka insisted on leaving before dark. Back at her cabin, she showed Greg something she hadn't shared before. A hide, aged and cured, stretched across a wooden frame. Burned into it were drawings, battles between beasts, towns burned, mountains shaking. She pointed to one symbol, a circle with 3 slashes through it. "That," she said, "is where he was born, Devil's Peak, west of here. That's where he'll go when he wants to finish this." Greg traced the symbol with his fingers. "Then that's where we go." Ashka didn't answer right away. Finally, she whispered, "You'll need help. The Shagoa that fought him before. There may be one more. But he won't come easily. Where is he?" She looked toward the dark window. "The mountains took him a long time ago. But if you can wake him, maybe we have a chance." Greg nodded once. Then the howling began again, closer this time. This time, they weren't alone in the night. Red Rock Canyon was a local treasure. On weekends, families hiked the trails, teens partied by the cliffside, and photographers climbed rocks to capture sunsets over the sandstone ridges. But on that cold Thursday morning, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the sound of boots crunching gravel and the radio murmurs of first responders. Greg stood at the crime scene perimeter, jaw clenched. The bodies hadn't been moved yet. 3 teenagers had gone camping the night before, 2 boys and a girl, friends from Palmer High. They were found at sunrise by a jogger who ran off the trail to relieve himself and stumbled into a scene so brutal he vomited until his throat bled. Greg stepped under the yellow tape and into the clearing. Blood was everywhere. One body was folded into a grotesque position inside a tent, as if crushed by something with inhuman strength. The second hung from a branch 12 feet off the ground, torso open like a butcher's carcass. The third, just a pair of legs remained. The rest had been dragged into the trees. What little was left had been gnawed to bone. Ashka stood nearby, eyes scanning the rocks. "This wasn't a hunt," she said. "This was a performance." Greg didn't reply. He was too busy trying not to retch. Behind him, a crime scene tech whispered to another, "What the hell does that?" The other just shook his head. Greg turned away and walked into the forest, where the path of destruction continued for nearly 100 feet. Scratched bark, blood trails, scattered teeth. Ashka followed. "You saw how he left them," she said. "He doesn't need to do that. He wants us to see it. He's escalating." Greg stopped and looked at her. "Why now? What changed?" "You," she answered. "And the other one." She didn't need to say more. Greg knew she was talking about the creature they had seen in the forest. The Dogman. Ashka crouched near a tree and picked something up. A piece of torn denim soaked in blood, tangled with dark hair. "He's tracking us. He wants to draw the Shagoa out. The humans are just bait." Greg ran a hand through his hair, his nerves shredded. "I can't stop this," he said. "Not with a badge, not with a gun." "You're not supposed to stop it," she said. "You're supposed to survive it." Back at the station, Sheriff O'Connor was waiting. Her face was pale. The death toll was now 7, all mutilated. Media outlets had caught wind, but official channels were holding it under the label of wild animal attacks. She slammed her office door shut and turned to Greg. "This is getting out of hand," she said. "You know it, I know it." "What the hell is going on?" Greg didn't lie. He told her everything. By the time he finished, her face was drained of color. You're serious? I wish I wasn't. She sat down, rubbing her temples. I should call the state, the FBI. No one's coming, Greg said. Not for this. They'll cover it up, bury it, and more people will die. She didn't argue. Instead, she opened a drawer, pulled out a file, and slid it across the table. Greg flipped it open. Inside were photos, black and white, grainy from 1984. Torn bodies, deep gashes, identical to the ones he'd just seen. These were taken just outside Teller County, she said. The case went cold. My father was the sheriff then. He used to tell me stories before he drank himself to death. He said there was something in the woods, something that couldn't die. Greg stared at the photos. It's back. O'Connor nodded slowly. I'll keep it quiet, but you better end this, Rollins, or we're next. Ashka and Greg left the station and drove east, toward the base of Devil's Peak. The road turned rough, barely drivable. They reached an old ranger outpost long since abandoned, just a shell of wood, mold, and dust. Ashka stepped out and faced the mountain. He's here. Who? Greg asked. The other one, the Shagoa. She approached a stone marker overgrown with vines and knelt. She whispered something in Ute, then stood and sliced her palm open with a small blade. The blood hit the stone and sizzled as if poured on iron. Greg stepped back. What the hell are you doing? Waking him. She chanted again. The forest held its breath. Then the wind shifted. It carried a sound, low, heavy breathing. Not human. Greg turned. Between the trees, something moved. A massive shape, dark fur matted with scars, amber eyes gleaming from the underbrush. The Dogman. He stepped into the clearing. Greg froze. This creature was different from the one they'd seen before. Larger, older. His chest bore a deep scar in the shape of a cross, his ears torn. He moved with a limp, but his presence was overwhelming. Ashka bowed her head. Koa, she whispered. The Dogman sniffed the air, then locked eyes with Greg. The stare was not friendly, not grateful, but there was recognition of the enemy they shared. Ashka spoke softly. He won't follow you. He won't obey. But if you give him a reason, he will fight. Greg didn't ask what kind of reason. Because then, something crashed in the distance, loud, close. Koa turned his head slowly toward the sound, his jaw opening slightly to inhale the scent. Ashka went pale. That's not him, she said. What do you mean? Greg asked. Another noise, laughter, not human, mocking. Ashka grabbed Greg's arm and pulled him behind a tree, and from the trees came something new, smaller than the first werewolf, but faster. Its eyes glowed brighter. Another had arrived. The alpha hadn't just come alone. He brought his pack. The attack began just before midnight. Old Colorado City was the historic heart of Colorado Springs, once a mining town, now full of breweries, boutiques, and brick buildings converted into bars. It was the kind of place where locals gathered on weeknights to drink, talk, and pretend nothing beyond the streetlights could harm them. The bar was called The Broken Stag. 27 people were inside. Greg and Ashka weren't among them, but they were less than 5 blocks away, watching from a rooftop, following reports of strange sightings around town. A call came through the police scanner. Static, screaming, then silence. Then the lights went out. All of them. The entire street. From the rooftop, Greg watched the bar's windows explode outward in a spray of glass and gore. Something had torn through the wall from the inside. Screams followed. And then silence again. By the time they got there, the screaming had stopped. Greg stepped through the broken door, gun raised, flashlight trembling. Blood painted the walls. Chairs were splintered, tables shattered. The jukebox had been ripped in half, its innards spilling onto the floor. Bodies lay everywhere, torn, dismembered, barely human. One man's torso was wedged into the ceiling beams. A woman's legs had been ripped clean off and tossed across the bar like discarded trash. Ashka covered her mouth. Greg stepped carefully, trying not to look too long at any one body. He found a man still breathing, barely, pinned beneath the collapsed bar. The man's eyes were wide with trauma. "It had hands," he whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Hands like a man, but too long, too thin." He died before Greg could say anything else. Koa arrived moments later, emerging from the shadows like a specter. He moved through the carnage without emotion, sniffing each corpse, mapping the scent trail. When he reached the far wall, he stopped. Ashka joined him. "He was here," she said. "The Alpha. The Kotsa." Koa growled low. His fur bristled. He turned and looked directly at Greg. "They left this scene for you," Ashka said. "They want you to feel the blood, the helplessness. They want you afraid." "They're doing a good job," Greg muttered. Ashka walked to the wall behind the bar. She wiped away a smear of blood to reveal something carved deep into the brick. 3 claw marks, slashing downward in a curved arc. Greg stared at it. "It's the same symbol from Tahuari's cabin," he said. "The mark of a challenge," Ashka replied. "He's calling Koa out." Greg exhaled sharply and turned away. Outside, police were starting to arrive. O'Connor pulled up in her cruiser, lights off, face pale. She stepped into the bar, took one look, and turned around. Greg followed her outside. "They're not going to believe this," she said. "No one's going to believe this." "They don't have to," Greg said. "But we have to stop it." O'Connor nodded. "I'll keep the town locked down, but whatever's happening here, it's beyond me now." Greg didn't argue. Back at Ashka's truck, they reviewed footage from a nearby gas station. A security camera had caught a blurry glimpse of something tall and fast moving across the parking lot just before the blackout. Another camera showed something perched on a rooftop, watching the bar. The creature never moved. It just waited. Until the moment it struck. "They were watching us," Ashka said. "Studying, learning how we react." Greg looked at her. "You think they're planning something bigger?" Ashka didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said. "This was a test." Greg slammed the laptop shut. "Then we need to end it." That night they returned to the ranger cabin near Devil's Peak. Koa was already there, pacing restlessly. Ashka knelt beside him, whispering in Ute. Greg watched her, wondering how much of her was human anymore. The way she moved, the way she read the forest. It was like she belonged to both worlds, and neither. Finally she stood. "He's ready," she said. Greg looked at the mountain towering above them. "We go tomorrow," he said. "At first light." Ashka looked toward the forest. "No," she said. "He won't wait. He's coming tonight." Greg froze. "Are you sure?" Ashka didn't respond. She pointed to the trees. Greg turned his flashlight. Between the branches, 50 feet away, stood a creature. It wasn't the Alpha. It was smaller, leaner, faster. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, more shapes appeared. 6. Maybe more. A pack. They weren't waiting for a final fight. They were launching a war. They didn't run. There was no point. Greg, Ashka, and Koa stood at the edge of the forest as the pack emerged one by one, tall, twisted. All fur and muscle and rage. They moved like predators, slow and deliberate, with yellow eyes fixed on their targets. No roars, no howls, just the sound of heavy breathing and clawed feet dragging across dirt and pine needles. Ashka whispered, "Back into the cabin, now." Greg didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and moved with her, Koa backing them up like a living wall of muscle and instinct. Inside, they slammed the door shut and barricaded it with a metal table and whatever furniture they could find. "There's at least 6, Greg said, loading the rifle. "Maybe more." "They're not here to kill us fast," Ashka replied. "They're here to wear us down. Bleed us." Koa stood by the window, silent, watching the tree line. Greg peeked through a crack. The creatures were still there, watching, waiting. Then one of them stepped forward. It had no fur on its face. Its skin was torn, revealing black veins beneath. It opened its mouth slowly, exposing fangs that didn't belong in anything that should have walked upright. It pointed at Koa. Greg's stomach dropped. "They want him." Ashka nodded. "They want to fight." Greg's hands tightened on the rifle. "Let's give them one." Ashka moved to the back of the cabin, where a trap door led to a crawl space beneath. She opened it and gestured to Greg. "They'll breach the front," she said. "We flank from underneath." "Split their focus." Greg looked at her. "And Koa?" "He draws them in." Koa met Ashka's eyes. She whispered something low in Ute. Koa growled softly but didn't resist. They moved fast. Greg and Ashka crawled beneath the cabin, weapons ready. Dirt filled their lungs. The wood above creaked as something massive stepped onto the porch. Then the door shattered. Greg heard the crash, the wood splintering, and the heavy footsteps of monsters entering the cabin. And then, chaos. The sound of claws against flesh. Furniture destroyed, bones breaking. Koa was fighting. Greg and Ashka emerged behind the cabin. The forest was pitch black, no stars, just moonlight and death waiting in every shadow. They rounded the building. Inside, through the shattered windows, they saw Koa ripping into one of the creatures. His jaws clamped around its spine, yanking it to the ground. Another jumped on his back, claws slashing deep. Koa turned and smashed it into the wall with enough force to crack the logs. Greg aimed through the window and fired. One of the beasts fell, chest bursting open. Ashka threw something, a small bag filled with bone dust and herbs. It exploded in the air, blinding the creature beside it. It howled, clawing at its face. Koa tore it in half. 2 more jumped in from the roof. Ashka kicked open the back door, pulling a flare from her pack. She lit it and drove it into the chest of the nearest creature. It screeched, smoke pouring from the wound as if it burned from the inside out. They fought like demons. The floor was slick with blood. Koa was covered in wounds, panting hard, but still on his feet. Greg fired again, hitting another in the shoulder. It stumbled, then lunged. Ashka shot it mid-air with her crossbow. The last of the pack broke through the front wall and vanished into the trees, retreating into the darkness. Silence, broken only by heavy breathing and the crackle of fire from the flare. Koa collapsed. Greg rushed to his side. Blood poured from deep gashes along his ribs and neck. His breathing was labored. "He's not going to make it," Greg said. Ashka knelt beside the beast. "No," she whispered. "He's not done." She pulled a small knife from her belt. "Hold his head." Greg didn't move. Ashka pressed the blade against her own forearm and carved a symbol into the skin, a spiral encircled by jagged lines. Blood welled up instantly. She leaned down and pressed her wound to Koa's mouth. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, the beast drank. His body twitched. The wounds didn't close, but the bleeding slowed. His breathing steadied. He opened one amber eye and stared directly into Ashka's face. A connection passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, something deeper. Greg watched in stunned silence. "What did you do?" he asked. Ashka didn't look away. "I gave him part of my line, my blood." She stood, wiping her arm. He won't survive the next fight, but now he can face it. Greg helped Koa to his feet. The dogman groaned but stood, taller than either of them, his shoulders trembling with effort. They stepped outside the ruined cabin. Blood soaked the dirt. 3 corpses lay in the clearing, already starting to dissolve, as if the forest rejected their presence. The rest were gone. But they'd be back. Greg looked toward Devil's Peak. He's up there, isn't he? Ashka nodded. That was just his pack. That wasn't the alpha. Greg turned to her. Then we climb. Ashka looked at Koa. He growled low, not from pain, but agreement. The final hunt had begun. Devil's Peak wasn't marked on most maps. Locals knew it only by legend. Stories about disappearances, mutilated animals, and hikers who left trails only to be found days later, empty-eyed and broken-limbed. The Ute called it a cursed place, where the veil between man and monster thinned. Greg, Ashka, and Koa began the climb at dusk. The trail was steep and winding, half lost under snow and dead branches. The temperature dropped sharply, falling below 35 degrees. Every sound in the woods echoed, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Ashka led the way, crossbow slung over her back, her movements silent and precise. Greg followed with the rifle strapped across his chest, every step heavier than the last. Koa moved behind them. Slower now, his wounds wrapped, but still seeping. He didn't complain. He never had. No one spoke, not until they reached the first marker. A dead deer. Split open from sternum to groin, nailed to a tree with sharpened branches. Its organs were arranged on the ground below in a spiral. A warning. Ashka didn't stop walking. He knows we're coming. Greg scanned the trees. Good. Then he'll know we're not afraid. Koa growled behind him. A low rumble of disapproval. He's not afraid of us, Ashka said. He's just making sure we're ready. The alpha won't fight unless it's worthy. They continued upward. As they gained altitude, the trees grew twisted. The soil turned black with rot, and the air smelled of copper and decay. Greg's legs burned. His hands were numb, but he kept moving. Another 100 feet up, they found the first trap. A man's body, dressed in hunting gear, impaled on a spike trap. He wasn't fresh. Skin dried, eyes missing, teeth scattered on the snow below. Ashka leaned close. He was turned, she said. Bitten, but not claimed. Greg furrowed his brow. What does that mean? Turned by a beta, a failed werewolf. The alpha didn't accept him, so he let him die. Greg felt bile rise in his throat. This thing isn't just a killer, it's selective. Ashka nodded. That's what makes him dangerous. An hour later, they reached the final plateau. At the summit, the forest opened to a wide, moonlit clearing. Dead trees circled the perimeter like sentinels. Bones were everywhere, scattered across the snow, some broken, some still bearing scraps of flesh. It looked like a battlefield. Koa stopped and stared across the clearing. Greg raised his rifle. Where is he? Ashka pointed toward the far side, where a cave mouth yawned black against the mountainside. There. They stepped into the clearing, and the forest came alive. Shadows shifted. Trees creaked. The wind carried a growl that wasn't wind at all. Greg turned toward the sound and froze. He stepped out of the cave like a king entering his throne room. The Alpha, taller than any of the others, nearly 9 feet. His body was scarred, fur patchy in places, chest marked with the same spiral claw pattern they had seen in blood before. His eyes weren't just yellow. They glowed like molten metal. He didn't charge. He stood, watching, measuring. Greg's mouth went dry. Koa stepped forward, his body trembling but upright. He growled once, loud, defiant. The alpha responded with a roar, not a challenge, but a declaration. Greg took aim. Ashka grabbed his arm. Not yet, this isn't your fight. Before Greg could argue, Koa ran. Not like a man, not like a beast, like something between. He crossed the clearing in seconds, leaping into the air and slamming into the alpha with enough force to send them both crashing to the ground. The impact shook the earth. The fight was pure brutality. No strategy, no technique, just rage. Koa sank his teeth into the alpha's arm. The alpha ripped free, slashing deep into Koa's chest with claws that tore flesh like paper. Blood sprayed the snow. Greg raised the rifle. I can't just watch this. Ashka shook her head. If Koa dies, then you shoot. Not before. Koa lunged again. The alpha grabbed him mid-air and hurled him into a dead tree. Bones cracked. Greg winced. Koa barely got up. The alpha advanced, claws flexing. But Koa wasn't finished. He darted low, tackled the alpha's legs, and drove him to the ground. They rolled, claws and teeth ripping, snarling, limbs twisting. The alpha gained the upper hand. He pinned Koa with one massive hand and raised the other to deliver a final blow. Greg raised the rifle. Ashka nodded. He fired. The bullet hit the alpha in the neck. Blood erupted. He staggered, howling, turning toward Greg, and that was all Koa needed. He launched upward, jaws clamping around the alpha's throat. Greg watched, heart pounding, as the two beasts crashed back to the ground in a frenzy of snarls and screams. Koa didn't let go. Not this time. The snow turned red. The alpha's body convulsed once, then went still. Koa rose, covered in blood, chest heaving. He limped toward Greg and Ashka, legs barely supporting his weight. He collapsed before reaching them. Ashka dropped to her knees beside him. His breathing was shallow. Greg knelt too. He did it. Ashka nodded. But her face was twisted with pain. Yeah, she whispered. But the cost was everything. Koa looked up at her, his eyes no longer glowing. They were just tired. And then, with one last breath, he went still. The silence that followed felt endless. Greg stared at the corpse of the alpha. Dead. But something in him knew. This wasn't over. Not really. Not yet. They buried Koa at dawn. Ashka insisted on doing it by hand. Greg helped, using an old entrenching tool they'd brought from the ranger cabin. The soil was half frozen, filled with roots and stones, but neither of them stopped. Not until the grave was deep enough. Not until the weight of what they had lost matched the hole in the earth. They wrapped Koa's body in a canvas tarp and lowered him into the ground at the edge of the clearing, beneath the gnarled tree where the wind never stopped. Ashka whispered something in Ute as she scattered pine branches over the mound. Greg stood back. He wasn't human, he said quietly. But he was better than most I've known. Ashka didn't answer. Her eyes were red but dry. She had cried in her own way, not with tears, but with ritual. Greg looked back toward the cave where the alpha had fallen. The body was still there. The wounds from Koa's teeth were too deep, too savage. There was no mistaking it. The beast was dead. And yet, something gnawed at him. Back in Colorado Springs, the story was already being rewritten. The authorities had quarantined the area near Devil's Peak, citing gas leaks and military activity. No bodies would be found. The massacre at the Broken Stag was labeled a tragic act of domestic terrorism. No further questions asked. Sheriff O'Connor never filed Greg's full report. She burned it. I don't want to know what I know, she said. And neither does anyone else. Greg understood. He and Ashka returned to her cabin 2 nights later. The place was barely standing, scorched walls, broken beams. Ashka gathered what she could, her pack, her bow, a few bundles of dried herbs and charms. She said little. As they prepared to leave, Greg noticed something strange in the snow outside the cabin. Tracks. Not Koa's. Not from the pack they'd fought. These were different, larger, deeper. The claws were longer, and they weren't headed away from the mountain. They were headed toward it. A survivor? Greg asked. Ashka shook her head. No. A father. He didn't understand at first. Then it hit him. The alpha wasn't the first, just like Koa wasn't the last. He was just the son, Ashka said. A juvenile, reckless. That's why he drew attention. That's why he challenged Koa. Greg's heart sank. Then the real alpha is still out there, she said. And he's older, smarter, stronger. Greg felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. We killed his blood, Ashka nodded, which means he won't come for land or territory now. She turned to him. He'll come for revenge. They left that night. Not because they thought they were safe, but because they knew they never would be. Greg returned to his small house on the edge of town. He kept his rifle cleaned, his door reinforced. He barely slept, not because of fear, but because of expectation. Every creak in the floorboards, every rustle of wind through the trees outside. He listened. Ashka disappeared into the forests. Sometimes he'd see her on the ridgeline, her silhouette against the sky, watching. Always watching. She never stayed long, never said much, but he knew why she remained close. Not for him, for the war that wasn't finished. Weeks passed, then months. The snows melted, spring returned. But Greg knew it was only a matter of time. And then one night, the phone rang. It was a call from a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, there was only a single sound. A howl. Long. Deep. Not the panicked screech of the younger werewolves. This one was old. Measured. Deliberate. It rolled through the speaker like thunder, shaking Greg to his core. He stood there in the kitchen, the sound still echoing in his ears long after the call disconnected. Outside, the wind shifted. The forest had gone silent again. Greg didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared out the window toward the distant mountains. And in the silence that followed, he knew. The blood feud was not over. Koa had fought and fallen. The Alpha's son was dead. But the father, the true king of the hunt, was coming. And when he arrived, there would be no warnings, no games, just a final reckoning. The kind of war that would leave legends in its wake. Koa's final stand beneath Devil's Peak is a brutal testament to loyalty, sacrifice, and the savage truth behind forgotten legends. But the true Alpha is still out there, and the real hunt is only just beginning. Like this video if you felt the dread of that final battle. Comment below. Who would you fear more in the dark, the werewolf or the Dogman? Share this with someone who needs to understand. The war between beasts has already begun, and it's far from over. And if you're ready to face what waits in the shadows, subscribe to Mr. Midnight Horror and hit the bell. Your warning before the next nightmare arrives.